two separate victims of violent muggings have just been brought in. Christopher Woods is 21 and Malcolm Hayden Smith is 23.
I'm just going to clean where there's no wounds at the moment.
Malcolm and Christopher have both been badly beaten. They were attacked half an hour apart, but it turns out they were also attacked within 100 yards of each other on Oxford's Cowley Road. Two violent assaults could be a coincidence, but by mapping a whole year's worth of police-recorded crime data on violent assaults, it's clear that the Cowley Road is one of Oxford's two main hotspots. On the left is violence in the city centre, and to the right is the Cowley Road. Both have drink-related violence, but unlike the city centre, the Cowley Road doesn't have CCTV. By day, it's a busy multicultural district, packed with shops and restaurants, pubs and clubs. By night, it's Oxford's second busiest centre for nightlife. The day after his mugging, Malcolm has been discharged from hospital and agrees to show me where he was attacked. He's a graduate student. He has dyspraxia, which affects his speech.
And tell us what happened.
Oh, yeah, these guys came up behind me. They said they wanted to show me something, and they dragged me into the church and all the way behind
What,
it.
they took hold of you?
Yeah.
And dragged you in here?
Yeah.
And what happened then?
Then they kicked and punched me to the ground. And they grabbed my gadget bag and they ran off in that direction.
How often were you punched, do you know?
About 5 times. They
Really?
were both punching me to the floor. It really hurt. I lost consciousness for like 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Christopher Woods was also badly hurt, in his case by 4 youths. There were fears he had a brain injury, but a CAT scan the next day put him in the clear.
I remember getting hit to the floor, and I woke up again with my hands over my face, and I'd sort of gone into fetal position just to protect myself, and I just saw like boots and feet kicking me in the face, and just then hands going into my pockets and taking my phone and wallet. I tried to flag down some cars and get them to stop and waved at them, but nobody stopped. Obviously I was covered in blood and people just thought, you know, he's been out brawling and he's drunk, and it just really hit me hard that nobody just stopped.
Will you go out just as much, or will you feel a bit fearful now?
I'll obviously be more aware because I kind of underestimated the dangers. And it's really upsetting when this happens because you're like, who can I trust now? I hope they get brought to justice and they see the error of their ways.
Do you think they will?
Hardly.
We're going to stay in touch with Malcolm and Christopher to see if the police find their attackers. There were no witnesses, and since there's no CCTV, it's not going to be easy. At the end of our 2-week audit, what does our typical city's experience tell us? Out of 150,000 residents in Oxford, 71 had to go to hospital because they'd been assaulted. That means about 1 person in every 100 would need treatment because of violence every year. The biggest danger is to men aged 18 to 30, and the biggest risk factor in all violence, by far, is drink. And whether in the home or on the street, only a fraction of it is reported, especially among kids.
So what happens to the victims who did tell the police? Their cases are now in the hands of one of the oldest, most renowned legal systems in the world. Let's see if it works.
Will police find the men responsible for the muggings of Christopher Woods and Malcolm Hayden Smith? Will any of the domestic violence victims get justice? And will the man who bottled 18-year-old Johnny Rayfield be convicted? The police arrested him that night before he left the party.
I have to look at it every day. It just reminds me of the night, really. And he's probably forgotten it already, and that annoys me.
Johnny was the first victim I'd met in the A&E department. I'm catching up with him to see how he's getting on while his case inches its way through the system. Jonathan, what effect has this had on you?
It's had a massive effect, really. I don't really go out that much anymore. And no, then there's also my physical appearance. It's all changed.
What was he like before?
He was always like really bubbly and quite hyper, and just. But now he's like doesn't really want to go out that much.
Why? Do you know?
Because if he is a nice guy, then what's stopping anyone from doing it? It's a bit scary.
It's really shaking you up, isn't it? Big
But it's
time.
understandable, really. But it's quite an emotional thing to go through. It's obviously affected him quite a lot.
It's 16 weeks since Johnny was bottled. At the Crown Prosecution Service, Carolyn Oakley has been waiting for the case file. It's often hard to know where delays take place in the system. But now she has the papers, she faces a dilemma.
It is a balancing act between the aggrieved that we've got in this case, who, as I said, who's a young lad who's got quite a serious injury to his face that will be there forever and has affected him in an adverse way, coupled with the fact that you balance it against a defendant or a suspect who has never been in trouble before. He's an 18-year-old lad who's got appears to have got very drunk and done something stupid. Moment of madness. So it is a difficult balancing act to make decisions about what you do with people.
In discussing the case with the investigating police officer, Carolyn is about to make a very important choice, and one that's not normally made in public. Her decision on what charge to bring is based on rules called charging standards, and depends on the severity of the injury. Her choice could profoundly affect the rest of the defendant's life.
So if we look at the charging standards of a wounding, Section 20 carries a maximum of 5 years. A wound means the breaking of the continuity of the whole of the outer skin, which is exactly what we've got here, haven't we? Section 18 can be the same injury, but requires an intention to cause that injury. And a Section 18 offence is life imprisonment as opposed to 5 years. So there's actually a huge difference between whether we charge a Section 18 or a Section 20.
What do you hope will happen to him?
I hope that the punishment is quite harsh. It might sound rude, but I want it to be harsh. Because it was an unprovoked attack, and the stress it's caused me, you just can't even add it up, really. It's just...
So you'd like him to go to prison?
Well, yeah.
You should just be taught a lesson. It should be an example to everyone that if you do something, you just got to pay the price for it.
OK, so we'll go with the 20. We'll re-interview him before we charge him, obviously.
Okay.
And go from there.
Carolyn has opted for the lesser charge with a notional sentence of 5 years. If the defendant pleads guilty, he could reduce that sentence by a third. Malcolm and Christopher were 2 of the 10 victims of violent street robbery during our 2-week audit. Both were mugged on the Cowley Road. And both gave a description, but though the police searched the area, they drew a blank. So how do they feel their cases have been handled?
Not very well, I don't think. I'm quite disillusioned with it all, actually, because I don't really think they took the time to actually investigate the case.
Really?
They said there was insufficient evidence. They just closed the case. And that's another thing. The police said they'd do an identity parade, or I could look at people on the computer, but that never happened.
The story is much the same for Christopher Woods.
About a week after I'd made the statement, I got a phone call from the robbery team saying, "Can you remember anything else?" I said, "No, I can't remember any extra details." And he said, "OK, we'll be in touch." I haven't heard anything since.
So 3 or 4 months you've heard nothing?
No, nothing at all.
The police had had little to go on, so it's not surprising nobody's been caught. But it was the lack of communication that seems to be why Christopher and Malcolm feel so let down. Yet this is one of Britain's most highly rated police forces. Sarah Thornton is Thames Valley's chief constable. So I've just come from talking separately to two different victims, both of really rather nasty assaults, one very nasty assault. They've hardly heard from the police, and they say, we just, you know, we don't seem to be very relevant to this process. Once we've given the police their information, that's it, we're out of the loop.
In terms of letting victims know what's happening, there are rules about when we're meant to tell people, and that should be happening. If it's not, then that is an omission. And we do put a lot of energy in trying to investigate them. They are hard to investigate if they've happened very quickly. People will commit street robberies where they know there are no cameras. So you see evidence of avoidance by criminals. And we've learnt over the years that the important thing is to try and get uniform officers there as quickly as possible, get the victim in the back of the police car, get them to drive around the area, see if we can identify the suspect really early on. You'd be surprised how often perpetrators will stay in the same area or not go too far, so that can be successful.
3 months after our audit, the council and the police installed 3 CCTV cameras on the Cowley Road. The press are out in force as the system gets switched on for the first time. It's reassuring for many local residents, but it's too late for Malcolm and Christopher, whose muggers presumably will never be found. What about our domestic violence victims, Jane and Laura? Will they see justice? In Jane's case, she's determined to give evidence, even though she's pregnant.
You're going to go through with the court proceedings then, with the prosecution?
Yep.
Absolutely. You're
Absolutely.
not going to back out at the last minute?
No, never.
Are you going to go into the witness stand? Are you going to go behind a screen? Are you going to do it via a television link?
The strongest way to give evidence in court is to stand in the box. My baby's my strength, and if I don't do it for me, I'll do it for my child.
We'll stay with Jane and find out the result. But in Laura's case, it won't get as far as court because she can't face giving evidence. That's even though the prosecution had prepared a file and her ex-partner was charged with assault.
I suppose the court system would work and protect women if people like you had more courage and prepared just to go through with it.
I just don't think we should have to go through it, though. I felt like I've been through enough. I didn't feel emotionally strong. I'm petrified. I felt like if I went to court, it would make him more angry.
For the manager of the refuge, Karen Diver, it's a constant problem in domestic violence cases where the evidence is often one person's word against another.
When these cases go to court, the incident they're talking about is one assault. Then how many have there been before then? If the woman gets the wrong detail about whether he slapped her on the right cheek or the left cheek, is she a liar, or is it because she can't remember which particular assault she's talking about? And if there's violence, how many sexual assaults have there been? And if you can imagine being put on that stand and having to talk through everything that's happened, I can certainly understand that people are reluctant to report.
But even if victims are reluctant to give evidence in court, does the case have to collapse? Police in Barry in South Wales think not. They're one of several forces pioneering the use of an almost irrefutable evidence-gathering tool. It's good for any crime, but perfect for domestic violence.
Presumably the officer who's wearing this camera, he's not a cameraman as such, he's just an officer and it just happens to be pinned to him somewhere.
Absolutely.
It's just looking where he's looking.
And he's taking part in the raid as an active officer. You know, he can go sort of hands-on if he needs to.
Detective Sergeant Richard Williams has used the camera for many crimes, including domestic disputes.
It would be perfect for capturing, for example, the demeanour of the perpetrator, how aggressive he or she was. It would record how upset the children we were. And of course, it would also capture the demeanour and any injuries on any victims.
I hitched a ride with PC Russ Barnett to see what happens.
When you turn up at these incidents and you may have a drunk, abusive male who will turn around to you and make a comment like, she was doing my head in, so I had to slap her. They're more or less admitting the offence.
In a way, it's a godsend for the police, isn't it? Because so often when you get to court, there's this sort of tennis match about do we believe the officer, do we believe the accused?
It's absolutely brilliant. There is no ifs, as you say, there is no question over what happened.
Close implanted major.
Russ's first call is not to a domestic dispute, but to a car smash, and the passenger is hurt.
I'll take it.
The driver is breathalyzed on camera, and he's over the limit.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of driving with alcohol on your breath in excess of the prescribed limit because you provided me with a positive specimen of breath.
The passenger is taken to hospital, though later discharged. As a result of the accident, the driver was fined and disqualified from driving for 3 years. Then, just before his shift ends, Russ is called to a violent domestic incident. Here is the video evidence of what happened next. A man they've arrested in the street has a nasty head wound.
How did you get that injury to your head, mate?
Inside the house, Russ questions a woman.
Can you tell me again how David came to have his injuries?
Visibly shaken, she admits on camera that she stabbed the man.
What did you stab him with? Okay.
So, within moments of arriving at the scene, both the man and the woman are arrested. Russ has captured valuable evidence of the man's injury and the woman's confession.
Well, the camera's obviously successful. They take away from victims all that stress of having to do statements, appearing in court. They make it much more likely the offender is going to plead guilty, and that saves a fortune in trial costs. There's bound to come a day when cops just use cameras routinely. And just think of all the hassle that's going to save. Every time the evidence is disputed, we've got a replay. Do you see this becoming ubiquitous? Will every police officer wear one of these things in time?
That's the position I hope we're going to move to. I think we should try to move to the point where using a head cam or body-worn surveillance is part of what a police officer does when he or she books on for duty, puts on the utility belt and handcuffs and a head cam as well.
The head cam helps catch offenders, but only after a crime has been committed. So what more can we do to stop it happening in the first place? As we've seen, one thing we can do is map it. Spencer Cheney is a world expert on crime mapping. He works with Britain's best blue light services and with hospitals like the John Radcliffe, which check and share data that could help reveal crime patterns. By helping to see when and where crime occurs, we can introduce measures to prevent it.
Give me a practical example. How can you use this to cut violent crime?
Well, what we can do is we can pull together information from the police and from the hospitals and use that to then track back to identify if there are certain problematic licensed premises. There may be an issue with the training of the staff there, serving people when they've had too many to drink, or letting people into the pub or club when they've had too many to drink. If we have a persistent issue with a particular licensed premise, we may then consider taking their licence away from them.
So if we really understand crime, why, when, where it's happening, we can intervene to stop it. And prevention is so much better than cure. Rather than spending millions, billions, chasing offenders after the damage has been done, we get there first. And after all, we've successfully cut violence in the past. We can do it again. Football is a classic example of how we got it so wrong and then we started to get it right. For years, whenever British fans went abroad, they were regarded as the scum of the earth. They shamed the country for their bad behaviour. Then the football clubs, the fans themselves, the police, they got their act together.
The clubs themselves were made responsible for stopping violence. They were made to pay for the policing. They were made to improve the stands and put in seating. They banned glasses and bottles, and they protected the crowds with stewards. Domestic football violence dropped dramatically. so that families can now go safely to the game. And violence around football grounds has gone down too, thanks to taking away one of the most common weapons. The Cornwall pub is just round the corner from Cardiff City Football Ground. When there's a home game, they serve pints in plastic glasses. It starts 2 hours before kick-off, and they keep using them till 2 hours after the final whistle. It's not just here that they use plastic. On match days, all pubs near the football ground replace their glasses with polycarbonates. Some of the guys over there were saying, we don't really like them, but actually if we had these non-stop, after 12 months, none of us would notice. It would just...
No.
You agree with that?
Yes. Yeah, down the line, no one's even going to look back at it, really.
The customers might not always like it, but the hospitals certainly do. In fact, it was Professor John Shepherd's idea. 15 years ago, 10% of all the victims of violent crime at his A&E had been glassed or bottled. How many injuries did you save, and what proportion of savings did you make?
We saw a 70% reduction in the number of glass incidents. That amounts to around 60 or 70 a year.
In this city alone?
Yeah.
So across the country, this is going to save literally thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people from serious facial damage.
There's an awful lot to be gained from these situational type interventions, looking at safety in clubs, the surfaces on the floors, sorts of materials glasses and bottles are made of, all those sorts of things.
No, you stay.
Sit down, Keith. Oh, sorry. Sit down, you're going to fall over. Sit down.
There's another simple idea that helps cut violence. Professor Shepherd and his colleagues have studied the behaviour of drunks. And they've worked out something you'd have thought you hardly need an academic to tell you. Drunks need more space than sober people. Staggering into people in crowded spaces can cause spilt drinks and aggression.
The answer is more space, less violence.
Pubs that limit their numbers or are in pedestrian areas where people can spill onto the streets tend to have less violence. But ensuring more space is just one of a raft of practical solutions. The thing is, will the drinks industry do voluntarily what the football authorities and others have achieved? Because if we want to stop the parade of injured victims coming through this place every weekend, then we have to make a step change. I've invited 3 people who make, sell and regulate booze to consider possible ways forward. Tony Copes is a licensing officer, James Clark is a brewer, and David Poley is from the Portman Group, the public face of the booze industry. It's Friday night, and I've asked them to come to Oxford's John Radcliffe Hospital, where we were based around the clock during our 2-week crime audit. Have you ever been into an A&E unit like this before, any of you guys?
No, it's my first time.
Sean, by the time it gets to, say, 4 o'clock in the morning, what proportion of these cubicles are going to be taken up with people who are drunk or have been hit by somebody who is drunk?
Oh, I'd say 90% at least.
What about the change in the licensing laws? Did you notice any difference since licensing opening hours have been relaxed?
I think we're seeing an increase now of people who are intoxicated any time of the day. I know you don't force people to drink, but I pick up the pieces every night, you know, and something's got to change. It can't go on like this.
Suppose we took a hospital like this and we said, look, in 2 years' time, our target is we're going to halve the number of people coming here with violent injuries which have resulted from drink. What do you have to do?
I think that alcohol itself does not automatically cause someone to become violent. In the end, it is the individual that has to take responsibility if they're violent, if they beat someone up.
If we try and break this down, because it's very difficult, could we get to that?
One thing we've got to look at is the happy hour. The way that people can actually just pay a set fee to go out and drink as much as they want.
James, as far as you're concerned, I mean, brewing the stuff, do you see more responsible ways of marketing it?
When you can buy alcohol in a supermarket cheaper than bottled water or milk,
and there's no duty on the water or the milk, then I think there is a bit of an issue that needs addressing there.
I'm still hearing it's not really my fault, not much I can do beyond what we're doing.
I think that
So the marketing watchdog is blaming the drinkers, the licensing authority is blaming the pubs and clubs, and the brewer is blaming the supermarkets.
There is one thing the industry are using, which is supported by the police. There's 16 pub watch schemes running through Oxfordshire. If they commit a crime in one premises, then they're banned from all the premises in that scheme. And for suddenly that right to drink in a town to be taken away, that's a very big incentive.
The drinks industry has got no wish to see its products misused and people ending up in here in A&E. That is why we are doing all we can through funding education and through marketing.
That terrifies me. If you're doing everything you can, we're going to have 1 million people. This is going to happen to next year, and 1 million people the year after, and 1 million people in perpetuity. If we're doing everything we can, we're stuffed, basically.
Well, in actual fact, we are making headway on this. I mean, I think you can halve the number of injuries. I don't think you'll halve it in a year. I don't think you'll halve it in 5 years. I think that in a generation you might do it, but it's going to take that long through sustained campaigning to change the whole attitude that we have to drunkenness at the moment.
What we've seen during our crime audit in Oxford reveals that violent crime is quite different from the stuff of headlines. We saw none of the gun and knife crime that so regularly makes the news, but
instead, a lot of alcohol-fueled violence on the streets and in people's homes. So what is the truth about violent crime? Is it going up or down? Well, there's one man who knows the answer because he's been counting the injuries through violence since the 1980s.
Obviously, there are concerns about knife crime and gun crimes, and there are spikes in those things. But the generality of violence and the extent to which people are put in hospital, that's been decreasing. I'm convinced of that.
I find this very hard to square, what you're saying, with what I'm reading, what I'm seeing on the news.
Well, from an A&E, from a casualty perspective, nationally in England and Wales, we've seen year-on-year decreases since 2000.
in fact, almost all long-term measures of violent crime support Professor Shepherd. But that just shows crime can be conquered. In any case, for victims, like those we met during our audit, the impact on their lives is immediate and sometimes huge.
And we can't just leave crime to the police and to the courts. Even when the system is run well, only 1 in 100 cases results in prison and only 1 in 30 ever gets resolved, which means that victims continue to feel let down.
We need to stop them becoming victims in the first place. And that means we've got to look for new, fresh, innovative solutions. Now, plainly, we are making progress by using scientific methods. We're beginning to map crime, track back violence to where it started, and that's helping us hold licensed premises to account, for example. And we are beginning to be less tolerant of aggression and drunkenness. But plainly, blame and justice simply aren't enough. We have to get in early before the crime has happened.
Jane, whom we met at the refuge, has resettled in another part of the country and is expecting the birth of her child. She gave evidence at her ex-partner's trial, but he was found not guilty. Laura has left the refuge too. She's moved out of Oxford and has got a new job. Johnny is backpacking around the globe. The man who bottled him pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm and was sentenced to 9 months. Damien has recovered from his broken jaw and is back studying for his degree. He did report the attack to the police some 5 months later. No one has been charged. Malcolm is hoping to take another course at university or find a job as a carer. There have been no arrests for his street robbery.